Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Money matters in love. How to overcome financial struggles together. You are keeping it real with Rhoda today. We're diving into one of the most challenging yet crucial aspects of any relationship, managing money. If you are sharing finances with someone, financial struggles are bound to come up at some point. Money touches almost every part of our lives, and when couples aren't on the same page about how to manage it, stress can quickly build. But here's the good news. When you approach it thoughtfully, navigating money issues can strengthen your relationship rather than weaken it. Why is it that one partner, and I swear we marry our opposites, is often more careful, perhaps too careful about money, and they end up in a relationship with someone who is not worried about the future and is not careful enough? This is a very ordinary combination of 110 opposite beliefs that leads to money being one of the main sources of tension in a relationship. The trick is learning to blend both and find your way as a couple into the 4, 5, 6, and 7 in between the 1 and 10. Combining these two opposite polarities can be a really good thing if there is respect, because the secret to life is negotiating while recognizing both perspectives have strengths and weaknesses. Juggling the complicatedness honestly can dig you out of avoiding these all-important conversations. As we are all just finished doing our taxes in April, having money talks now might be smart as we evaluate the last year. Having money conversations is part of being able to talk about hard things. It means owning your side of the fence. Yes, I can too easily be in the moment and spend money in unnecessary ways. Yes, I can spoil fun sometimes by being overly worried about money for vacation when we just borrowed for the new siding on the house. So solutions to money problems begin, number one, understanding your own perspective, the good and the bad, and number two, honestly talking about this with each other on a consistent basis. Stop avoiding should be the bottom line for both of you. Often the surprise of financial stress can pull the rug out from under trust in the relationship. The surprise of debt that wasn't honestly revealed, job loss, unexpected expenses, or hardcore opinions on how to handle debt. It's easy to fall down the rabbit hole of financial pitfalls. Too often in tough times, it's easy to let money issues take over and create emotional distance between partners. But it's possible to navigate these hardships with mutual understanding and respect, and even come out stronger on the other side. Today's guest to provide insights into money struggles in relationships is Brian Page, the founder of Modern Husbands and a podcast of the same name. And like me, he does not make money on his podcast. We share ideas on managing money and the home as a team. He is a former Milken National Educator of the Year, CNN Money Hero, and working group member of President Obama's Advisory Council on Financial Capability. He has consulted for state governments, universities, and various nonprofits. So both his website and podcast, again, is called Modern Husbands, and he offers free materials on the website, another favorite thing of mine. Welcome, Brian.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
So in my intro, I described a typical pattern of a spender with a saver. What is your advice to help my audience see the value of both? And please help us understand how to respect both these positions.
Well, if you've been married for a while, it might not feel like this right now at this moment, but I can assure you that when you first started dating, one of the reasons that you fell in love is because your partner was a financial opposite, or at least that was one of the reasons. And that's because we seem to look for people that help us become better at what we see or feel might be deficiencies. So let me give you an example. I'm a tightwad. So that means that I'm not just frugal. I'm actually someone who has some pain sometimes when I spend money. And for me, life's short. I don't want to die with a bunch of money in my casket. I know that I have to live life. It's helpful that my wife is obviously an intelligent woman and thoughtful, but she's far more willing to spend money than I am. And to be with someone like that, it makes it better because now I can do the things that deep down I really want to do, but it's hard for me to come out of my shell and do without that other person. Now, when you're married, after, you have to recognize that there can be challenges that come with being married with a financial opposite, right? Because as much as that can be helpful, where a spender recognizes that if they don't have someone who helps them, they could overspend, and a saver might recognize that without a partner who helps them, they're not going to spend enough to enjoy their life. They also can, without guardrails, spin off the road. So, for example, if I'm someone who is just unwilling to spend money, and because of a history in my childhood or whatever it may be, I'm constantly resisting, that's going to create frustration. And that can lead to financial infidelity. That can lead to a partner saying, you know what, it doesn't matter what I do and what I spend money on. He's just going to get upset anyway. So I'm just going to spend and hide. And like the people who are committing financial infidelity are doing something to the person who doesn't want to spend, because now there's deep-seated trust issues that have been created because they're spending money behind their back. So it's important that you recognize the good things, the qualities that come by balancing each other out, but also recognize that without thoughtful conversations and, if appropriate, specific money management systems in place, that without those guardrails, that it could lead to problems.
Yes, and I am a Gestalt person, so I really love the yin and the yang and the sorting it out in between. And you you get less frugal, and she gets more paying attention because you exchange some of that energy or appreciate it in the other person.
Right.
And then you make better decisions together and you're more of a team. And that's really that's really cool. Being able to grow and change and become better and more whole. I like that. What can you tell us that is helpful to breaking through the resistance of the partner who doesn't want to look at the problem or talk about it? How can you help grease the wheels to help someone start these difficult conversations?
Well, the first thing that is important to acknowledge is that people could not want to talk about money for many reasons, but it often boils down to two. The first could be simply a lack of confidence. Not everybody had any sort of financial education in school. Some people had parents who either modeled managing money poorly, or they weren't taught how to manage money by their parents. And the other reason could be that there's been financial trauma. A lot of the ways in which we view our relationship with money are shaped from our childhood. And there are traumas that exist in people's lives that revolve around money that make it really difficult to have money conversations. And when you're approaching your spouse or your partner, let's say you're dating, I think it's important that you approach them with not only empathy, but curiosity, kind of seeking to understand where they're coming from and not making any assumptions, because everybody's money story is so different. And so if you're taking the perspective that you're going to be empathetic and that you're going to be curious about why they feel the way they feel about money, it makes it a lot easier to have open and honest conversations. Now, there are two ways, and I'll give you two scenarios in which you should begin to have a conversation about money. One is when you're dating and things are starting to get serious. And a strategy that I picked up from Dr. Abby Davidson is that it's easy to start talking about money seriously on your first getaway trip, your long weekend together. And don't get me wrong, I realize that you've probably talked about money before then. Heck, when you first started dating, you're speaking about money by just looking at each other's social media profiles to see how they live their life, what they spend money on, etc. But the first explicit conversation, a good time to have it, is when you go away. And that's because You can talk about what your budget would be. Where's your comfort zone for spending money? When you do spend money, how do you like to spend it? Are you carefree or do you like to plan? Are you someone who just wants to go to hotels.com and just pick a hotel? Or do you want to really dive in and think deeply about frugal ways to have an exciting vacation? And you'll find that just by talking about money on a weekend getaway to plan that, when it's all about that, it's a good way to learn about each other, but it's also non-threatening because you're having fun with one another. The second would be for the listeners who are already married, and perhaps money conversations are things that are not helpful in your relationship right now because you haven't gone about it in the way that I would suggest. So let's say that you want to start from ground zero. I love using the lottery strategy. Pick up a lottery ticket, spend $2, and schedule some time where emotion is low so cognition can be high. Because unfortunately, so many people talk about money when money comes up, meaning there's been stress, right? So they've gotten a credit card statement in the mail and seen that there's a high balance, or maybe there's Amazon boxes on the front porch for the 9th day in a row, whatever it may be. And then people are talking about money, which means they're arguing. Don't do that. Schedule some time where emotion is low so cognition can be high. And maybe you're laying in a hammock, maybe you're on a walk, maybe you're sitting at the couch with a glass of wine, but you're talking about money in a joyful way because it's a conversation about what you would do if you won the lottery. So while you're holding that lottery ticket, just dream, just take some time to discuss what your life would look like. Now, we all know that you're not going to win the lottery. It's obviously highly unlikely, but what you're really unpacking is what it is that you can do to make your life better. So let's say, for example, what has come up in your lottery conversation, the pattern that is evident is that you want more time with one another. So maybe the next time you get a bonus or a pay increase, instead of letting lifestyle inflation creep in, or instead of just going to buy a new car or that couch, maybe you decide, hey, let's outsource some of the tasks that take time away from us. Let's hire somebody to mow the lawn. Let's hire somebody to clean weekly, whatever it may be. Like, that's an example of the types of the type of thinking that come about when you're talking about money and it's not a threat, but rather a joyful, purposeful conversation.
I really like the lightness of that and the playfulness of it. And it's not so serious and angsty and pissed off. It's great. I really think that's wonderful. What are some smart financial goals, and how do couples go about building a set of shared financial goals? How do they then balance personal spending versus joint goals?
Well, what I love about that question is it is a good second step after the lottery date, because the lottery date, that money date, is going to bring about, at least you would think, like one thing that you've recognized that you can do differently with your life now, with what you're earning and what you're spending, to make your life better. So my suggestion would be to make that your first shared financial goal. And I want to be clear to the listeners, this is assuming that you are financially healthy. If you're not financially healthy, meaning that you're having trouble just making payments on time, you're living check to check, those are the kinds of circumstances that are going to create stress in your marriage. So I would recommend always addressing those first. And then after those are addressed, then you can start to build a layer of excitement and joy that is the appropriate next step after you're financially healthy. So anyhow, that first shared financial goal, what's so beautiful about it is that it makes it easier to spend and save money because you're both working toward the same goal.
Mm.
Now, you brought something up that's important. We all want to have some autonomy in our relationship too, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it can be a little bit difficult. And that's where we get into how our bank accounts are structured. Now, I want to stress that everything I'm sharing is just research based, right? So about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, Dr. Jenny Olson, who's on my advisory board at Modern Husbands, she came out with groundbreaking research that found that for first time married couples and engaged couples, that when they just put all of their money together, that it actually causes happiness. So prior to that, it was always a correlation every time. Like couples who were happier blended their money. And so the reason I bring that up is because for most couples, that's the appropriate starting point. First time married couples. The reason for that is it's our money, our life. And so when my wife has a personal goal, I'm going to support it because I love her. And I don't look at it as my money and her money. I just think it's all of our money. And whether it's a personal goal that she has, my children have, whatever it may be, it's all the same. And it's living one life together, respecting that by living one life together, we still have to have personal autonomy. But not everybody is able to do that. There are some who are tightwads and spendthrifts, meaning a tightwad is someone who not only enjoys being frugal, but it's painful for them to spend. Those tightwads could be people who are married to spendthrifts. Spendthrifts are people who don't just enjoy spending money, but they can't put their foot on the brake. Now, when that happens, there's going to be financial problems that come about. And if your money is all blended and there's no personal autonomy, unfortunately, what can happen in those situations is that the spender, who always feels attacked by the tightwad, decides, I don't want to put up with it right now. I'm just going to spend this money and not tell my husband, or I'm going to spend the money and not tell my wife. And the problem with that is that that's financial infidelity, and it's a betrayal of trust. And so, you can argue who's at fault. Perhaps it's the person who committed financial infidelity, but you could also argue it's the tightwad who's painting and pushing him in that corner.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's not good. So a way to handle that would be have an hours account where your money is directly deposited. And it's important that your money and your partner's money all goes into that joint account first. And there is where it's psychologically money laundered. And that's where bills are paid, mortgage, credit card bill, whatever. And then you each have an offshoot from that, your two little individual accounts, your own individual accounts that with nominal money, $100, $150 a paycheck, whatever it may be. And those accounts are for you to use in whatever way you like. And those accounts can be looked at by the other partner, but it's not recommended. Like, you want financial translucency, right? Not necessarily transparency, because let's face it, the reason that you have those individual accounts is to avoid the arguments in the first place. But you also don't want people to wonder whether you're using that for nefarious reasons. So that provides a structure where people who perhaps are significant financial opposites can have both a shared financial goal and a way they live their lives with a little bit of autonomy.
Very nice. I like putting those two things together, and I like that it's research based. And I do think, though, that when people are married later in life and have achieved more success, that it might be a more creative solution, because of signing prenups or not signing a prenup, but being able to how you're going to put your money together, and maybe you're not going to put it all together because it's later in life, you're in your 50s and you aren't sure who the other person is exactly. So I think it's more complicated, but I like you made a distinction about that.
And you brought up a really good example, because what I was kind of guiding you through is the research for people in their 20s and 30s and sometimes 40, like first time married couples. However, when couples are older, like you said, and in particular in second marriages, it's different. And so what the research says, for blended families, so second marriages, and this is according to Michael Van Cleve. What I just shared before that was from Dr. Scott Rick from the University of Michigan. But Michael Van Cleve is getting a doctorate in managing money in blended families, and he's in a blended family himself. And what he found was that because in particular, when you have kids that are coming from prior marriages, there's so many layers of complexity in a blended family that you want to structure your money in a way where it simplifies everything as much as possible. And so his recommendation is to have an account for your prior life. So like child support, alimony, whatever it may be, and then have a joint account with your new partner for your current life to keep the financial world separate. And for couples who perhaps are, my dad right now, my mom passed away 7 or 8 years ago, and he has a girlfriend. They live together. She's not a spendthrift, but my dad is the most frugal. My dad is definitely a tightwad. He is the most frugal human being I've known by far. And he lives with his girlfriend. They have for a while. He just writes her a check for whatever they need, and they just work it out, but they don't have a blended account. But they're also 80 years old. And so when you're 80 years old, things are pretty well established, and my dad wants simplicity. And so my dad's like, I have plenty of money. Just tell me what I owe you for rent or whatever. And he usually pays for everything when they go out. And the reason I bring up, and I know I don't mean to complicate it by not giving you one specific answer, but that's because relationships are messy. And
That's right.
and like, there's no such thing as a system that is perfect for everyone. What you have to figure out is what system is perfect for you and your circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. The dreaded B word, budget. What are the upsides of having one? And so many of us think of this as a negative or even a punishment. Help shift us into seeing this as possibly a good thing.
I'm going to shock you. I have a very loose budget. I hardly ever go into it. And part of that is I think that we're making enough money right now where we don't have to count every penny, but it's like the word budget is restrictive.
It is.
I use the word budget because that's like it resonates with people. But then when I start to talk about it or write about it, I'll quickly convert it to spending plan, because really that's what we're doing. We're just spending our money. It's a spending plan. So here's my recommendation. We know from all kinds of research that most people stink at having like lots of lasting willpower. And like, you shouldn't go through your life agonizing about every decision. Like, that's not a good way to live. So what the research has found is that people who live their life purposely and accomplish their goals don't necessarily have more willpower. They've just put systems in place to make willpower less necessary. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, our investments are automated. It gets really common for you to have a 401k and you don't think about it. It's just invested. So let's say that you and your partner are doing that. So my first tip is, have you talked to your partner about how much that they're contributing? Because research found that 1 in 4 couples, 1 in 4 had not only never talked about it, but 1 in 4 couples were investing enough collectively to get the full employer match. But because they never talked, one was investing more than was necessary to get the match. One who was like, ooh, we don't have enough money for me to invest more, was not investing enough. So they were leaving on average $700 a year of the money that they should have gotten for matches on the table.
Wow.
So just by having a conversation about, hey, honey, how much are you contributing? Like, that in itself is going to help you. So automate your investing. And that way you can't screw that up. The next thing is, we've talked a lot about these shared financial goals, and a spending plan is simply a plan to reach those goals, both short-term and long-term. Investing's for the long term. Well, for the short term, the best strategy is to set up a savings account that is at a different financial institution than you do most of your everyday banking. So let's say that you have your phone out. I have my phone out right in front of me. If I click on my mobile banking app, there's a checking and savings account. It always comes with it. I have like $25 on that savings account. It's nothing. Because when you look at my mobile app, if I want to just take money from my savings and put it in my checking, it takes 2 seconds. It's just 2 checking accounts. That's all it is. However, my money is in a separate savings account at a different financial institution because it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and that extra obstacle of having to wait 1 to 3 days, unless I want to pay a fee, causes me to be more likely to live within my means. So my suggestion would be, do you want to budget? Absolutely. Like the most important things, pardon me, the most important things that you can do is to never overspend on a fixed expense. So like when you go to buy a house, don't overspend there, because that's a mistake that you experience every single month when you're making the monthly payment. Don't overspend if you're borrowing to buy a car. Like that's a mistake you experience every month. Make sure that your fixed costs are low. Make sure that you're automating your savings. And then other than that, frankly, if you want to have a meticulous budget, have at it. That's wonderful. Do my wife and I? No. We have 3 kids. Like you should see the mental gymnastics of all the things that come up in life. And it's almost hilarious to me that people are like, well, if you didn't budget for this, that month, that you can't use that. That's stupid. Like that means you do not live in the complex world. It just doesn't work that way. So that's a long-winded answer of saying,
I loved it.
Automate your future investing, your future goals with investing, automate your savings goals, automate for emergencies, and then make sure that you never overspend on any fixed costs. And if you're constantly just talking about money and just looking at your account to make sure that you're okay, you'll be fine.
That's great. One of the things that I ask people often when they bring up money is, do you know what the interest is on your credit card? And I cannot begin to tell you how many people do not have an answer for that. And so I make them go home and I say, go home and find out. And because then when you buy a sweater, but you haven't paid off your card, you are putting more money into that sweater than you realize.
Yeah.
And so trying to keep that monthly balance within your means is one of my ideas of trying to be more thoughtful about money.
Well, so my trick with a credit card is, particularly if things are tight, I look at I realize that a credit card is not connected to a checking account. I realize the mechanics of it, but the psychology matters. Before I use my credit card on something that I don't necessarily need, I look at my checking account to make sure I can pay it that day, because I pay my credit card balances in full every single day. I know that sounds insane, but that's how I earned a perfect credit score, because so much of your credit score is on your revolving credit limit, meaning, or your utilization rate, meaning do you use like really low percentages? And if your balance is constantly 1% or 0%, but it shows activity, that helps your credit score. So I actually don't know the interest on my credit card because I've never paid interest on any credit card debt.
So mine just dropped. My credit score just dropped only because I closed out a credit card I wasn't using that I had gotten to get a companion pass. And then I realized we're not flying on this airline. This is stupid. And I closed it. And sure enough, I knew that's what was going to happen. But I read somewhere what you just said, your tip. Only I'm not paying it every day, but if you pay a good chunk in the middle, and then and my credit score doesn't matter because I'm old and I have what I want and things are working, but it annoyed me. My husband makes fun of me. He thinks it's really funny. I'm like, it's not fair. I just closed a card I don't use.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, it's annoying. I mean, we have accounts that are really old that I literally only use once every 2 or 3 months, because I don't want to shorten my length of credit history, but I'm also a financial geek. Like I know that's weird.
No. Okay. So, I don't build up any interest costs, and you've just given us your advice about credit cards, and you don't build up any interest costs either. How can a couple go about dividing and sharing financial responsibilities?
Okay. So I want to start by answering the question that this should be a conversation that should not just be about money. This should be a conversation about managing everything that comes with the home. And that in the modern world, most couples, majority of couples, work full time. And the model 60 years ago was that women stayed home, or maybe they had the flexible job, et cetera, et cetera. So you had this model that a lot of people grew up seeing where women did more at home because they were expected to do less at work, or because they did, or because they didn't work outside the home. Well, that model is not the model that currently exists in the workforce, but unfortunately, it's oftentimes the model that still exists in the home. So there are a lot of women who do more of the home management, but are working every bit as much, if not more, outside the home. So any conversation about money management tasks needs to be accompanied with the overall goal of making sure that both partners have an equal amount of leisure time. That's important. So you got to divide everything so both partners have an equal amount of leisure time. Meaning that means the mental load too. So the best way, knowing that's principle number one. Principle number two is that there's a big difference between controlling money and managing money. So controlling money is something you do together. It's when you sit down on your money date. It could be the first lottery date conversation. It could be the conversation you have every week. And you are looking at, where do you want to go with your money over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever? What do our savings accounts look like, et cetera? You're controlling money together. Managing money is the action of doing it. So my wife doesn't manage our money. I do it all. She knows where our money is going. She has access to that information. I bring that information to our money dates, but I'm the one who manages the money, the tasks, paying the bills, making sure we have enough in our savings, et cetera. But we control it together. If one person controls the money, that's a form of economic abuse. It's important that you never relinquish that control to one spouse. If, let's say, one person controls the money and the other person's completely fine with it, that might not be abuse, but what that can lead to are really big problems if that person passes away, because they're not going to know what to do. You have to have deep conversations about money because it's how you're living your life, but you also have practical conversations too. So if something happens, you know how to pay the bills.
I had a woman and I was shocked. And it was back, I think it was around that 2008 stock market crash. And she was in her 70s and didn't know anything about money, but she knew her husband was really stressed out. And I spent a lot of time encouraging her to have a conversation because she was really afraid and he was less healthy than
Yeah.
she was. And she never did it. She never was able to do it, and I just thought, "Oh my gosh, that is gonna be such a mess," and he was borrowing money from their kids, which she was upset about as
Oh,
well, and so that was I just thought of that. I had forgotten about that, but that was another part of the thing that she was really upset about, but he was in charge, and, she catered to him, and that's the way it was, but it was scary for her, and it wasn't smart for him, as far as I'm concerned.
right. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, a lot of people aren't talking about in those scenarios where oftentimes the men are painted in a negative light in that scenario, but he's also shouldering the entire financial burden. And that's stressful. And unfortunately, like, there's a man box where men are told, like, if you're not a good financial provider, you're
That's
worthless as a
true.
husband. So he's naturally going to be like, oh my God, I have to handle this. I'm a weak man if I talk to my
Yeah.
wife about it.
And it's really it's not respecting that both people need information is power and both people need information. And they can
Yeah.
then decide things
Yeah.
differently. Maybe we need to sell a house. I know when my husband's business wasn't doing well, and we had this conversation because somebody was visiting who was watching the kids, and he was worried about his business. And I said, we'll sell a house. If that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. And I was pretty matter of fact about it, but it freed him up so much. And
Hmm.
we never did have to do it. It really worked out, but he just needed that sense of, okay, that's a good backup plan, you know?
That's a
Yeah.
great example.
Yeah. I'm always stressing to my couples that life is all about change and uncertainty. So, my prejudice would be to build an emergency fund together. What is your advice about this?
As I said, I'm a tightwad. So you could argue that I'm an oversaver. And the reason that I save so much, the rational reason, is because I've used savings as the distance we create between ourselves and danger. And the more we have in savings, the greater that distance. We can weather some pretty strong storms when we have a lot of savings. And it's not something that is just limited to an emergency savings account. So as an example, in our health savings account, our HSA, we max that out every year. I don't pull from it. I still use the cash to pay up until the deductible, but I don't use the savings account money to do it, because you can compound that and then invest it. And I'm doing that because I don't necessarily trust that the government is going to be stable in 10 or 20 years when I have to have Medicare. So I want to make sure that if that happens, that we have enough money to weather the storm, and I can pass that down to my kids. So my advice for people who are considering how much to save is to remember that a savings account gives you the power to be free. It gives you the power to manage problems. It gives you the power to change careers, to move to a different state or even a different country.
And to pay for implants. They're about $5,000 each. So, but my HSA is currently being drained for that purpose, and it's. I was really glad it was there. I think our biggest mistake financially was that we were both self-employed, and so we both had to pay for insurance straight through until we turned
Oh,
65. We didn't have anybody helping us out, and we also benefited from that. We got to have 6 weeks vacation most of my life, even in the nonprofit world. They didn't pay you, but they gave you lots of vacations. So there were trade offs. And I just think that money is such an interesting thing when you don't think about that bigger picture. But I do think that financially that was our biggest mistake, and we're fine. We have a great life, but it's not a fancy life, so to speak. We're not in the 1%, that's for sure, and we're happy.
fancy lives, they don't bring
Yeah, I don't think
happiness.
so.
Like all the research says the same thing. They don't.
I remember there was an Israeli study a while back that said now I don't know exactly what year, but they said people would be surprised that 75,000 was where people had happiness, and people that had more money than that felt they never had enough.
So yeah, so that study, there was one. It was Daniel Kahneman was one of the authors. He was a Nobel Prize winning economist, and the first study that came out was that the increased happiness that occurs beyond 75,000 per person, that's important, is pretty nominal. And a second study came out years later that said there's still increases up to 500,000, but then after that there's none. And when you look at it, kind of just practically using your common sense, frankly, if you're in many cases, if you're making a lot of money, you probably are working a lot of hours. So you're not necessarily happier just because you're making more money. And for the life of me, I can never figure out how somebody can have 50 million and think that 55 million is going to make them happier. It doesn't, there's no research that shows that it actually
Yeah.
does.
I it's money is such an interesting topic. It really is, and it's such a part of our lives, and all the jealousy people have looking at Facebook and social media, and it's a conundrum, I guess I want to say. Are there any other
Yeah.
financial habits or mindsets that couples can adopt to create a more solid future that we haven't covered that you'd like to share as my final question?
I think the most important point that want to make, I want to make it through a story, is that if you want to use money as a tool to unlock happiness, that the first thing you need to understand is what are the common values that you share. and that those values should be the foundation of your relationship. And if you don't have a conversation about those values and the origin of those values, you're going to have fights and not understand why you're fighting. So I'll give you an example. My dad grew up they grew up on a farm, and they were sharecroppers. You know, they didn't have a lot, and to finish college, he had to live in a railroad car, right? And so he did it. He lived in a railroad car. He worked on the railroad part-time while he was going to college. And growing up, we had the worst cars. Now, I'm before I paint this picture of what our cars were like, I had a great upbringing. My parents were wonderful. My parents, we did lots of great things, but they were frugal. So I remember vividly being followed on the way home from the grocery by someone who wanted to purchase it was my mom's car. And it was one of those old giant Woody station wagons, but it was in such bad shape, even though it was not for sale, that he recruited it to be entered in the Clinton County Demolition Derby. And I saw it. It won. I saw it. Okay. That's how big of a piece of garbage it was. Okay. So it gets worse. So then the second car that we drove, that I had to drive in high school, my dad finally had to sell it when the tailgate rusted off, and the hinge rusted off, and like the trailer on the back that had the lawnmower like went into the yard. So it was so bad that when he decided, okay, I'll get a different truck, he told the people on the phone, you just have to take my car off my hands. I don't want anything for it. Just take it off my hands and don't charge me. So he said the salespeople looked at the car and they were in amazement. They never seen like it. It was so bad that the metal door handles had rusted off. So he drilled holes where the door handles were and ran metal fish wire. So you grabbed like a hook and had to pull it like a weed whacker to open the doors. That was what my father drove. Okay. And so I go to college. I'm from a small rural town in Ohio, and I realized, wait, not everybody drives cars like this. Dad, you guys, like, you had rental properties, you had a good job, mom had a good job. Like, what's going on here? Why did you do this? And he said, well, get out your calculator. I said, all right. How much is a car payment? I said, no, I don't know, $300 a month. He said, okay, how much is insurance? Because you have to have comprehensive insurance now, because, car payment, $100, $125. It's like, plug that in. Now take that times 12 months. Now take that times 20 years. So I'm looking at this number, and it's a big number. And I'm like, what's your point? He says, well, son, my point is that there's no way in hell my kid's going to live in a railroad car like I had to afford to go to college. And that's how I could afford to pay for yours. And that was the first time it hit me that money is this tool that you can use to make the lives of the people you love better. And fast forward to when I was teaching, and I won a teaching award that came with $25,000. And I instantly was like, great. It's $17,000. I explained to my wife, because we have taxes. Because that's the first thing. Like, whenever I bring things up to my wife, whether it's their bonuses or whatever, eventually I have to explain that that's not the real number. Here's the real number. And that's a whole separate conversation. You have to do that delicately. Not everybody has like little calculators without emotion like me. But so it's $17,000. And I wanted to use most of the money to put in a 529K. She wanted to go to Disney World. Our kids were really young. Why? Because that was the memory of her family. Now, her family they were not frugal. They didn't pay for her college. But they had a nice car. They had a nice house. They went to Disney. They were kind of like the Joneses, right? Nothing wrong with that. She had a great upbringing, and she wanted that experience that she had at Disney for our kids. And so I was like, look, I wanted to go to a 529K. I want to put it in there. I want to go to Disney. And this is how you do not win a fight, because I would handle it much differently now. But what I said was, I tell you what, when our kid goes to college, I want you to tell him, we don't have money to pay for college, but we did take you to Disney World when you were 3 years old. That is not how to conclude that conversation. But what we were really arguing about was the origin of our values. And I didn't tell my wife why education was so important to me. She had no idea of the sacrifices that my parents made. And I had no idea why that was important to her. And so if we would have had those conversations first, she would have been a heck of a lot more understanding and empathetic. And I would have too. And it would have been a lot easier to compromise about how to make a big financial decision, because we would have had an appreciation and respect for each other's deep-seated values and been able to move forward together.
Great story, really. And I read somewhere that it was some huge number. I'm a boomer. 50-60% of boomers did not save money for college for their kids, which really surprised me. And yeah,
Wow.
and I don't know where I read it. I can't cite, but I know. And I just was like, oh my goodness, that's terrible, you know? So I really have appreciated you joining me today. And would you remind people about your podcast and your website, which has so much good stuff?
Well, thank you. Modernhusbands.com is where you can go for ideas to manage money in the home as a team. And we can, obviously, you can get to our podcast there. It's the Modern Husbands Podcast. So there are three of us, myself, Dr. Bruce Ross, who teaches at the University of Kentucky, and then Christian Sherrill, who's a personal finance expert. And you're going to be a future guest. We look forward to having you on.
Yes, thanks.
And we have conversations on our podcast about how we can work together in the world where everyone's busy. Most of us are working, just to figure out how to manage everything in life together as a team, so we have a fair and equal amount of leisure time. Everything's free on the website. Our podcast is free. I don't get any money for it. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. That's the budgeting fun we've got for today. A huge thank you to Brian Page for making us feel like we could get our finances together. Until next time, stay debt-free, stay stress-free, and maybe treat yourself to a little something nice within the budget, of course, or spending plan, as Brian calls it. Follow me on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and even TikTok at Rhoda on Couples.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.